Hi, today's lesson is not only about canning beef stew, but I also have a really important lesson about what happens when you add thickeners. So please watch this video until the end. Hi, I'm Beth, creator of dryitcanit.com. I'm not an expert, but I like to share what I've learned about canning food, dehydrating food, and share original recipes with you. Today, we're going to can a beef stew, and we're going to do it with gravy. Now, flour is one of those things that are not considered safe, so technically this is not a USDA approved recipe. I'm going to use Clear-Jel today as my thickener instead of flour. Clear-Jel is a refined cornstarch, and it's used frequently in canning for fruits. Now, fruits are also high acid foods, and this is not a high acid food. But I'm also going to use my new friend Madge, which is a data logger, which I'll have inside these jars to make sure that I can get this food up to temperature and be comfortable that it's safely canned. So what I'm going to do is I have about 2 1/4 pounds of beef chuck that I've cubed. I have about 4 good-sized potatoes, 4 large carrots, 3 small onions. I have some salt and pepper. I have some bay leaves. I have some fresh thyme, and I have some home-dried parsley. I'm going to prep all of these ingredients. I'm going to brown my meat. I'm going to add my onions, potatoes, and carrots to that to get those warmed up. I'm going to warm up my jars, and I'm going to mix my herbs together and add that all into the pot of hot food. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mix up some Clear-Jel with some chicken broth. I would have preferred beef broth, but I don't have it. Chicken broth will work just fine. Water would work just fine. And I'm going to mix that up into a slurry, and then I'm going to add that to the food, and then I'll be canning it up. So I'll be back as we proceed through this, and I'll show you how this works. Meat is mostly browned. My goal is not to cook it through, so now I'm going to add the carrots and the onions. Now, when I started the beef, I did add about 2 tablespoons of oil to get it going, and I also put salt and pepper on the beef. Now I've added my carrots and my onions, and I'm just going to let those heat and stir them as I prepare the potato. I do want to talk about potato prep. So generally, if you're going to can potatoes, you're probably going to skin them and then you're going to blanch them. You're going to soak them in water to get rid of the extra starch. I'm not going to do that today with the stew because that extra starch will actually help me produce the gravy that I want to have in my stew. But the other thing you want to do with your potatoes is make sure that you scrub them really well and make sure that you check them for any blemishes before you use them, because you simply don't want those blemishes in your food. So then go ahead and peel your potatoes. I use a potato peeler because I just don't like peeling potatoes, but this works really well for apples also. And then you want to cut all of your food in bite-sized pieces. Now, the blemishes, that goes for carrots and onions and everything else too. Make sure that you're using good quality food to start with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off these edges. I actually take my scraps and put them in a Vitamix recycler because we live rural, and literally when we put the garbage out, we have bears and raccoons. So then just take your potatoes and your other vegetables and then cut them to bite size. Now, bite size, you're probably going to think is good bite size, but things are going to look bigger once you get them in the jar. So if in air, go a little bit smaller than what you think you actually want to do. And then what I do is I salt and pepper my vegetables as I add them. I think that's the best way to do that. So everything's cooking in the pot, getting hot, and I'm just going to take and sprinkle some pepper on this, and I'm going to sprinkle some salt on this, a little bit more salt, and then I'm going to add this to the pot of vegetables. So again, what I've used is 2 1/4 pounds approximately of cubed chuck roast. I removed most of the fat. I had, I think, 3 or 4 large carrots. I had 4 large potatoes and 3 small to medium onions so far. So I'm going to add this to the pot, and I'll be right back. I've added my potatoes to my pot. And again, my goal is to heat everything up here, not to completely cook it in the pot. I've got salt and pepper. And then to that, I'm going to add my herb seasoning. I have about 3 teaspoons of my fresh dried parsley. And I have a teaspoon of whole let's see, what did I add in there? Those whole thyme leaves. I don't know, my mind went blank on that. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that. And now what I'm going to do is prep the Clear-Jel, and I'll show you how I do that. To prep my Clear-Jel, I have 1 quart of chicken broth. Again, you can use water, you can use beef broth, use water, add bouillon, whatever you want to do. And I heated this in the microwave for about 3 minutes, so it's hot. Not boiling, but hot. And what I want to do is I want to mix this together so that I have a slurry, because I don't want the lumps of the Clear-Jel in there. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water at a time, and it basically makes a very thick gel. But I don't want, you can kind of see how gloopy it is, I don't want the clumps of Clear-Jel in there. And so you're just going to keep adding liquid to this. And I have liquid, of course, in my pot cooking, because the meat and the vegetables are releasing liquid. And as it cooks, it's going to release more liquid. So I'm just going to really mix this well to try and get rid of those lumps. And it is very thick, and I'm going to just keep adding broth a little bit at a time. And that's really the secret to gravy too. You want to make a slurry and then add it to your pot. You do not want to have those clumps of flour, in this case, the Clear-Jel. And it's a little bit tougher to get mixed up today than I thought it was going to be. But I'm just going to stay at it. And I have a gel that's a little bit, well, it's definitely thick, but it's looser than it was. I mean, it doesn't stick to the beater anymore. But I'm going to keep adding my broth. And I want broth in my pots, in my jars, I should say, when I can them, because that liquid is really important to bring everything up to temp. Now, I'm probably only going to fill the liquid about half full in my jars, again, because my meat and my vegetables are going to release liquid too. So this is looking pretty good now. So I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of this. So I don't have any lumps, I don't have any, well, I guess I have 1 or 2. I need to put my glasses on to see this. I do have a few clumps of Clear-Jel left there. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to strain those out of a screen, with a screen, because I don't want those in there. So I'm going to add the rest of my broth, like so. And I'm going to get a screen and I will be right back. I'm ready to strain this. Now, if I'd have done this a little slower, I probably wouldn't have had the few lumps that I do. Is there anything wrong with those lumps? No, it's a visual thing. I just don't like to have it. So I'm just pouring this through a sieve, or a screen, so to speak, and we'll shake it out. And I do have a little bit left there that just didn't really dissolve, and I don't want the clumps of that. I don't want somebody to have a bite of stew, for example, and then have a bite of gel-like material. It's not appetizing. So what I have here is, it pretty much looks like liquid. I think it's going to thicken up as I cook it. It might not. This part is an experiment. But I'm ready to start dishing up my stew into my jars. My carrots are al dente, in other words, a little bit soft but still crunchy. The potatoes are just starting to get a little bit soft. The meat's been in there. I added the order of meat first, then the onions, salt and pepper, carrots, because they take the longest probably to cook, and then potatoes. And again, I did not cook this through. So let me start dishing this up into the jars, and we'll get this into the pressure canner. My jars were heated. I use an electric pressure canner, a Presto. My jars get heated with half of them filled with water, and then bring the water up to temperature. And now I'm going to fill my jars. Now I want to leave 1 inch of headspace with all of these. And basically I'm just going to go in and I'm going to scoop up what I have and put this in the jars. And then I'm going to try and pack it a little bit. There's broth at the bottom of this, and I'm putting that in there too, but it's going to make broth for me also. So let's use a funnel, and again, to get 1 inch of headspace, you basically want to fill it to this bottom rim here. So I'm going to fill up my next jars, and then I will show you, once the jars are filled, what the next steps are. I got 4 pints, probably just short of 4 pints. This one I would have liked to have had a little bit fuller, but I have about 4 pints. I'm going to take 1 bay leaf, and I'm going to put 1/4 of a bay leaf into each jar. I think a whole bay leaf would be a little bit too much in each jar, and I think a half a bay leaf would be a little too much. So I'm just sticking 1/4 in each one. I have my friend Madge, my data logger, in this particular jar, and so I'm going to be able to log the temperature on this. So basically I've added all of my vegetables and my meat, and now I'm going to take the broth. Now when I spooned the vegetables and the meat into the jars, there was a little bit of juice at the bottom, and I just poured some of the Clear-Jel broth, or the Clear-Jel broth that I had, into that to get all that flavoring out, and I'm going to use that. So I'm going to take this now and add liquid, so it's about half full on each of these. And again, the vegetables and the meat are going to give off some liquid as it's cooking. And if I have more room for the liquid, then I'll add a little bit more liquid. I don't really want to get siphoning, but I may get siphoning off this jar that's not exactly full. The whole purpose of headspace and the purpose of pressure canning is it pushes the oxygen out of your jars. And what that does is allows you to get a good seal and to preserve your food in the best way possible. Now I do have more broth, so I'm going to fill this to about 3/4 full on each one and see where we're at there. And again, this is the first time I'm doing this with Clear-Jel to get a little bit of gravy, so we'll see how that works out. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take and I'm going to debubble each jar. I'm just going to use the back of a wooden spoon. This step is really important. You want to get as many air bubbles out as you possibly can. And as I do this, you can see that the food is actually settling more, so I really have more headspace than I want here, but I'm going to go with it. So I have these jars debubbled. I know that this is the one with my friend Madge, so I'm going to mark that jar. Now, I did have oil in here, and of course the meats have fat, so I'm going to just take a clean rag dipped in vinegar, and I'm going to clean off the edges of my jar. And I'm going to do that because you don't want any grease on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and put on my lids. Now remember, with your lids, you wash them first, but you don't need to soak them in hot water, more than likely. If you have old lids, you may need to do that. Check the back of your box so that you know for sure if you need to do that. So you're gonna put the lid on, you're gonna put the screw band on, and you're gonna put that just finger tight. You're not gonna force it at all. I'm going to mark this one because I know it has my data logger in it, and I want to be able to retrieve that afterwards. And actually, I forgot to plug the data logger in to set it up. So we're not going to have a data logger today. I'm going to have to take this jar apart and redo this, so bear with me again. So when you do things live, sometimes you miss steps and have to come back to it. So to keep the other food hot, I went ahead and put the food in the jars, clean the jars up, and put those in the pressure canner because I need the food to stay hot. This I put back into the microwave so that it was hot. So I have my logger now, and what I want to do is get my food in here so that I can get that into the pressure canner. And I need a spoon yet. Here we go. So I'm going to put just a little bit of food in there to hold the data logger. And then I'm going to put the data logger inside of the jar here in the center. My hand just fits that. There we go. And then I'm going to spoon a little bit of that food in around it, just so that I know it's going to stay in place. Now it actually moved a little bit, so I want to move that back into the center there. The center of your jar is the coldest part of the jar, so it's important that that is in the center of your jar in order to get a good reading. So I'm just going to move some of the stuff in here carefully. Oh, science, right? But it's interesting to do this, and I like to do it to make sure that I'm using safe canning practices. Okay, now I'm good. So I'm going to go ahead and spoon the rest of the hot food in here, which I reheated in the microwave, and put the liquid back in there. And I suppose really I could just pour it in there since it came out of the jar. All right. And then I'm going to give this a good wipe, first with just my towel because I made enough of a mess here. And then I'm going to go ahead and wipe it with I'm going to go ahead and debubble it carefully. And again, you're just gonna go around the ridges to release any air bubbles or air pockets that are there. And then I'm going to take my clean rag, dipped in vinegar, and wipe the edges really well so that I know that I have no grease on the rim and I should be able to get a good seal. Now, this is a little bit less than, well, it's an inch less than what I really want for headspace, so I might have some siphoning off of some of these, but I'll still have a good usable product. So again, I'm going to put my lid on, I'm going to put my screw band on, just finger tight, so just pressure, and I'm going to put that in my pressure canner. These are all going to pressure can for 90 minutes because it is meat. And then I'm going to take them out of the jars. I'm going to let them cool overnight. I'll pull Madge, my friend, out probably later tonight once the jars are cool enough to handle and get a temperature reading. But this is really all there is to beef stew. It's a nice hearty lunch or dinner to have on hand. Certainly you can do it in pints, then you do it 75 minutes. So I will show you what the results of the data logger are, and we'll see how successful the gravy mix might have been once this is all done. So come on back and be sure to watch the rest of this to see what the results are. My jars of beef stew are out of the pressure canner, and this is what your jars should look like when they're done. You should see them boiling within the jar. Anytime you have a liquid like that, that's a good sign. So I'm going to let this cool for 12 hours and make sure they seal. I'll open the one with the data logger earlier and probably have that for supper, and we'll see what the temperatures look like. Welcome back. It's the next day. My beef stew has rested. All 4 of my jars sealed. I actually had no siphoning, which surprised me a little bit. All of the beef stew did settle a little bit also, which is just fine, and it turned out well. Now I opened the one jar that had my data logger in it last night and had it, and it was really good. And I have the data also, which I'm going to show you on that. So here's what we learned today. First of all, remember that I added the Clear-Jel to try and get a gravy with this. And I evidently didn't add enough of it, so to speak, because I don't really have a thick gravy, but yet I have something that is definitely thicker than just plain water, just plain juices. So if I pour this into my jar, you can see what I have, and it's like a gravy. It's a thinner gravy, but it works out just fine. That said, what I learned with my data logger is having a gravy in there does in fact change the temperature and lessens the amount of time that it was above 240 degrees. In this particular case, that's okay. I made a note of things, and the 240 degrees I was at for 18 minutes, and I'm comfortable that I definitely got into the kill zone. But remember that things like flour or eggs or milk are, in theory, things that are going to slow down that temperature to getting to that 240 degrees. So you get above 240, and that's where it's supposed to kill the botulism spores. Am I comfortable this is safe to eat? Absolutely. I have no qualms about it whatsoever, and it's quite tasty. I am going to put the recipe, so to speak, below so that you can follow this if you want to make this. And it is really tasty, and beef stew is a really nice thing to have in your pantry, especially with winter months coming up. Now, I also told you that I talked, that I logged my data, and I'm going to do a close-up of the data. I don't think you're going to be able to see it this way, but there were a couple of interesting things that I learned, and I'm going to do a close-up of this chart and then share those with you. So I hope you'll stay tuned, because I think it's an important lesson for us to all understand when we're pressure canning. I'm going to hold this still as best I can, but this is the chart that the data logger makes. And so along the bottom is the time that I measured, and along the top is the degrees in Fahrenheit. So what you want to do generally is you want to get to this 240 degree mark, which, you know, we definitely surpassed here. Ignore that dot, that's for something else. And then I have my time on the bottom. Now, because I had to compress this chart, I had to pull out the times on this, and the stew hit the 240 degree mark at 2:27 p.m. and dropped off of the 240 degree mark at 2:45 p.m. So that gave me 18 minutes of time at 240 degrees. But here's what's interesting. At 2:31 p.m., the pressure canner was done canning for 90 minutes and started its cooling stage. But what actually happened is the temperature continued to rise and still fall, and a good part of that 18 minutes was actually after the pressure canner stopped cooking. So why is that important to know that after it stopped cooking, it was still above 240 degrees? Well, it's important because in this particular case, 14 of those 18 minutes were at 240 degrees after it was done cooking for 90 minutes. And so that's the reason when you're pressure canning that you don't want to say, oh, my time is up, my 30 minutes, my 90 minutes or whatever, and you don't want to move your weight and you don't want to start releasing the pressure because that's going to drop your temperature faster. So it is really important when you're pressure canning to follow your manufacturer directions, let the pressure canner decompress, so to speak, or cool naturally by itself. You're generally going to have a weight that's going to come down, and or I use an electric canner and it's going to tell me when it's done, but sometimes that weight is still up, and I never force that pressure. I always let that come down naturally. So anyway, what we learned today was a couple of things. Number one, we learned how to can beef stew. Great pantry shelf item to have on board. Open it up, eat it, good to go. We learned that using a thickener such as Clear-Jel can be done and can get into the kill zone, but it definitely does decrease the time in that kill zone. Generally, I'm seeing more like 25 to 40 minutes in that kill zone, so the thickener did slow that down a little bit, so that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. And lastly, we learned that it's really important not to push faster or to release the pressure from your pressure canner before it's ready to do its thing. Let it go naturally. So I hope that this lesson was important in that you learned some things about pressure canning. I hope you liked the idea of canning some beef stew. I really hope that you'll subscribe to the channel. I've got some more great recipes coming up and more how-tos. So thumbs up if you liked the video. It kind of helps me know what kind of videos to show. In the meantime, thanks for watching and happy canning.